Well, good evening and thanks for joining us on The Late Debate. I'm James Macpherson with Caleb Bond, and back from her week in London, Liz Storer. Liz, how did you go? You were at the ARC conference.
I was.
Tell us about it. What were the highlights?
It was absolutely fabulous. Being from Sky News, it was like catching up with a pile of friends because we've had half the speakers, well, more than half, I'd say, on Sky News airwaves for many years now. So it was kind of like a family reunion, to be honest.
There were some great speakers. Before we get into tonight's news, just give us the highlights. Who did you really enjoy?
Oh my gosh, that would be hard. But for me personally, it was Nigel Farage. Just because personally, he is someone who just exudes authenticity. At ARC, you've got a lot of the born to rule types, which, well, I call them that because they kind of are. But on a personal level, Nigel is someone that his authenticity, his down-to-earthness, he had the audience laughing more than anybody else, just because he is who he is and he stands for what he stands for. And obviously being in the UK and speaking as the leader of the Reform Party, he had everyone on the edge of his seat because you're quite possibly listening to the next Prime Minister.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he knows how to give a stump speech, does Nigel Farage. And he actually said at his 60th birthday party that he was the only bloke on GB News who does his show without auto cue because it's a bit hard to read when you're half pissed.
Very good. Well, on that note, let's get into tonight's program. We all know that Donald Trump does not miss when taking pot shots at his opponents. Wait until you see his latest meme taking aim at slackers within the public service. It's pretty good. Plus, we'll get to what's making news tomorrow, including more revelations from Tony Burke's citizenship extravaganza. And the cost of living crisis doesn't seem to be affecting people in our national capital. Wait until you hear what the papers are reporting public servants are spending on furniture. All of that when we look at tomorrow's news. But first, dignitaries gathered this week just gone in Darwin for the commemoration of the 83rd anniversary of the bombing of Darwin. Japanese bombs rained down on that city, killing 230 Australians and wounding 400. So it's a pretty important anniversary. And it began predictably, like landing a jet on Virgin Airways at Sydney Airport with a welcome to country. The welcome to country went fully 5 minutes. You can imagine what that was like for people sitting in the Darwin sun. And then after that, well, every guest speaker knew exactly what was expected of them.
Yana Nirlibid, Naniji, Respect Gilamerjan, Billy Lira, Daraba, Nari. I give our respect to the Larrakia people, elders, men and women. To all First Nations custodians present, I also pay my respect.
Can I acknowledge the Larrakia people and pay my respects to their elders past and present.
And I acknowledge also, of course, the Larrakia people, whose soil it also was. If the adversary had succeeded, all was lost.
I too acknowledge the Larrakia people, the traditional owners of the land on which we meet.
We meet in Larrakia country, and James, thank you very much for your welcome to country. And I see quite a few friends from the Larrakia people. Bilavara, good to see you.
7 speakers in a row all felt the need to acknowledge local Indigenous people before they spoke about what they were there to commemorate. But then, like a cool breeze on a hot Northern Territory summer's day, the Chief Minister, Lia Finocchiaro, got up to the podium and she spoke.
I'd like to pay a special acknowledgement to the veterans here today, to Territorians, to serving men and women, to the families and descendants of survivors, ladies and gentlemen, but also importantly to our children.
Well, cue outrage. Labor MP Manuel Brown said the Chief Minister's failure to acknowledge Indigenous people was, quote, very concerning. Concerning how? What was he worried was going to happen? What's he afraid of? Not to be outdone, local Indigenous elder Richard Fejo Sr. told local media that the Chief Minister's omission of acknowledgement of country was, quote, disgraceful. Well, I kind of think that if you have to divide Australians into black and white at every public ceremony, that's kind of disgraceful and very concerning. But to the Chief Minister's credit, she did not take a backward step. In the face of criticism, she told media, and I quote, "I'm proud to have acknowledged veterans at the bombing of Darwin, and as Chief Minister, I represent all Territorians. There is absolutely no need for every speaker at an event to do an acknowledgement of country. And in fact, the repetition that people are so used to under Labor is less impactful. Caleb, she won the election last year, but when she's up for re-election, I tell you what, she's got my vote just on that.
Well, you'll have to move to the Northern Territory first, but I look forward to you going through with that promise so you can go and actually vote for it. But it's what she says at the end of that sentence, that the repetition has made it less impactful, which is what I've been saying for so long. That, you know, if you had an occasional welcome to country performed by an Indigenous person at a major event, we'd all sort of move on and not particularly give a rat's about it, but it gets shoved down your throat everywhere you go, and it's not good enough to have it once. You've got to have it twice, 3 times, 4 times, 7 times in this case, right? And I've felt this for years, that, you know, you have an acknowledgement at the beginning of an event, whatever, but then everyone gets up afterwards and feels like they need to say it. Well, the acknowledgement has been done. I mean, it's implicit in that acknowledgement having been done that everyone agrees that we've now acknowledged the people who are in the room, or perhaps not even in the room. You don't need to all do it. And the reason they all do it is not because they actually mean it, but because it has become the pro forma thing that you do when you get up to speak. And so if you're only doing it because it's expected of you, it literally means nothing. It's not an acknowledgement of Indigenous people, it's an acknowledgement of the fact that you are expected to acknowledge the Indigenous people.